morning, everybody. Welcome as you all come online to the Sales Director Incubator. Great to see everybody this morning. My name is Mike Dixon. I lead the Sales and Marketing Division for AXR Recruitment and Search. And for many of you who've been on this call before, you now know that as 20 plus years as a professional recruiter, my biggest frustration is seeing someone's career slow down and narrow before they reach their potential. Too many career conversations for me are not as productive as they could be, and the decisions consequently narrow rather than expand a career. In the Incubator series, we'll explore why this happens and help future and current leaders to prepare for better career conversations to make better career decisions. So in each session, we're going to learn about a different sales director's career journey, how they've gained the experiences and skills to reach senior leadership. We'll look at their successes, failures, and lessons learned. Today's the second session in season 2, number 8 in total. I'm delighted to be joined by Peter White, Commercial Sales Director for Campari. Welcome, Peter. How are you?
Right, good, thanks.
Excellent, excellent. I'll give you a bit of background on Peter, and we'll explore his career as we go. But he joined Campari as commercial sales director back in January 2019, and has about 17 years experience across the FMCG, liquor and retail sectors, both in Australia and the UK. And prior to Campari, Peter held the sales director role at Frucor, and before that spent a good 12 years or so at Mars Wrigley, where he worked across sales, strategy, category, field management, and marketing. So we're going to explore Pete's style in terms of being an authentic leader, and somebody who builds inclusive cultures. And I want to really understand how that helps unlock the potential in others, and we'll bring that story to life. Now, for those of you who are used to being on many of the sessions, you'll know that you'll be muted. For others who haven't, sorry, but you can take part. There's a chat facility. Please jump on, ask questions as you go. If I think they're relevant to the conversation as we go, we'll ask them there and then. Otherwise, we've got time at the end, and we can ask the questions then. So let's get into it. So Pete, before we get into the career journey, when you're not being a sales director, what do you do?
Yeah, good question. Look, with two young kids and a wife that's a PT, we spend most of our time outside. And I think that's important from just trying to break away and have that place where you can switch off and do something you enjoy. So if it's a sporting event or the beach with the kids, seems to be where most of my time. I've taken up golf actually. Having not played since I was 18, and I was speaking to someone the other day, and they actually said, "Isn't that part of the role of being a sales director?" But I think that was many years ago. It's not so much anymore.
Yeah, look, I'm a keen golfer. I've tried to get a couple of golf days to go to the sales director. There's not that many golf anymore. So it's just it's definitely although a lot of young men and women are getting into golf. It's become a bit of a modern sport again.
Yes, it is.
It's having a bit of a renaissance. So let's look at earlier on. You did a double degree University of the Sunshine Coast, which to me as a Scotsman feels like probably the best place in the world you could possibly go to uni. It was I went to Stirling in Scotland. It was not like the Sunshine Coast. Now you combined commerce and science. I'm interested because the science degree covered sports, exercise, and public health. Were you tempted down the sport or science pathway at all?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I was coaching rugby, so I was a level 3 rugby coach. So that kind of got me into more of the sport and science side. And I was interested in the public health, the mental health side of that, just as an add-on to learning. So I think, yeah, for sure, it was definitely could have been a pathway that I ended up going down, and that kind of changed when I ended up in the UK, and I was balancing coaching rugby and then starting to work, and kind of end up more down the business side than the sports side.
Right. And you ever look back and think, what if?
Oh, don't be wrong. I'd love to be in that industry at some point, but I think you make these choices as you go through, and I'm glad I was able to do that degree, because there's a lot I understand industry with my wife now a PT.
Yeah.
Being able to help her through that is also good as well. But yeah, it was just good to do something different as well, and have kind of both options. When you were going through. Also, the extra year meant I got an extra year on the Sunshine Coast as well, which was quite good.
Yeah. I do like interesting degrees. I must say, I'm always intrigued by the choice of people make at uni. But So you joined in terms of your career, FMCG career. You joined Wrigley in 2006 as a territory manager when you were in the UK at the time working for BP. How did that happen? How did that move into Wrigley happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'd been working for BP for just on 2 years as a store. I ran a couple of their flagship stores over there, and I think having background with my parents who'd run supermarkets, restaurants, and hotels, kind of had that retail background. But doing 77 hours a week and trying to coach rugby and have a life was difficult. And obviously working on in store, you meet a lot of field reps that come in, and I just thought it would be an interesting one to dive into to get a bit more balance, but also continue to put the degree to work as well.
Yeah. I was interested in the retail FMCG piece. I think it's a really nice combination. I think not enough people in Australia look at retail and FMCG as a career you can jump between.
Yeah, I think it's I don't think it's as difficult as it sounds. And obviously, I think the difference between customer head office, retail in store, and supplier, they all give you different experiences. And going into field management and then into national accounts, having understood what happens on the shop floor and what's important and how you run a mini business helps when you're having those conversations with the head officers at customer level around what you're talking about. So it's good. I think good experience if you can get some sort of cross experience there.
Yeah, great. And in the next 8 years, you worked across field sales, customer management, brand management, shopper roles in Wrigley UK. So you had a really good stint there. Before, I think 2013, moving to Wrigley, Australia. What was it like when you came back to Australia after a long period away? And how would you compare the UK and Australian FMCG worlds?
Yeah, I mean, I probably had a slightly different experience, and purely because I transferred back with a company.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of knowns around that. But from an industry point of view, there was a lot more similarities than I first thought there may be. And you hear about more customers in the UK versus Coles and Woolies in Australia being the dominant the retail. But I think from a capability, the ways of working were all very similar. I'd say the biggest difference at the time was probably the role category and shopper played in the UK. That was probably further advanced than where it was, and the expectation on the customer on that was far more advanced, I think, in the UK at the time. But I think Australia obviously has come a long way within that space, and there's a lot more parity across the market around that area.
Yeah. Do you ever do you keep in contact with your colleagues back in the UK at all?
Yeah, I mean, obviously obviously at Wrigley's, it was easy to stay in contact with a lot of them, but obviously with them all now in different businesses, there's quite a few you still reach out to, and you can pick up the phone and just understand what's happening over there and what's happening in different customers. And I think having those connections is important because it keeps your perspective open to what's going on, and you can bring that into your current job or current discussions you have.
Yeah, great. I've met lots of people who return from overseas to Australia, and they struggle to readapt to working life sometimes. I think there's specifically those who don't transfer back with a company. You were able to do that with Wrigley. And I think there's lots of reasons why this might happen. Sometimes it's because the potential employers that they're looking at don't necessarily value overseas experience as much as local market experience, but I think it's sometimes because the individual might have lost contact with their Australian network as well. With that in mind, would you encourage people to actually work overseas, COVID to one side, to develop their career?
Yeah, 100%. I think the understanding different cultures, ways of working and all that is a great experience you can develop by working overseas and working in different either business units within the same company or different companies while you're over there. So I think definitely an opportunity to broaden your experience and pick up skill sets that you might not get in your current role that you can bring back. So I think it was a great experience for me. Interesting, I went for 2 to 4 years and came back 10 years later. Yeah. So it was kind of, I enjoyed it while I was there. And I think because you're constantly learning new things, it makes it a lot easier to stay and pick up those skills.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a tsunami of talent about to leave the shores when we're able to. Yeah. And what do you think people can do when they are able to go overseas again to maximize their overseas experience when making their return back to Australia?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I think when you do it, I think because obviously I left the day I finished my basically last university exam, so I didn't have a network in retail. So,
Yeah.
But I think if you've been working in the industry, it's to the point you know, we were alluding to earlier. How do you make sure you always stay connected to people within the industry? I think your network is what's going to help you when you come back to understand what's going on. And I also think when you do come back is, you know, I've seen people try and change industries, get promoted, you know, obviously different companies, different countries. It's a lot to change in one go. So I think how do you make that choice when you come back, that it may be a sideward step role, it may be with the same industry. So you settle back into the country, give yourself the best opportunity to learn the industry, learn the local market before you start progressing your career. Further again, I think if you take all those changes in one go, there's a lot of pressure to get it right, and that I think can undo people if they're not careful.
I say it does often frustrate me. I think we sometimes have a narrow view about overseas experience being and this country being very unique from a trading perspective. And I think that there's definitely some merit and truth in that. But I think it does close off the potential to bring in fresh thinking. Sometimes
I would suggest, I think as humans we're very good at trying to decide what's different. And I think in general there's probably a hell of a lot more similarities in the choices like that than differences. And I think if we can embrace those, that's where the real opportunity is. But it's very easy. And in different markets, if you go to the UK, they think Australia is very different. If you go to China, we think China is very different. But there's a lot of similarities around ways of working, the way we work, and the capability you need to be successful. So I think if we can look at people more around the similarities to start with, we'll probably find we bridge that gap a lot quicker.
It's interesting, actually. I thinking the other way around. If you'll have seen Australians land in the UK, and some be more successful than others, how do you make it work the other way? How does an Australian who targets the UK, because it's an interesting market to work in, how do they? Why do some make it work perhaps better than others?
I think understanding why you're doing it. I think if you're going overseas to do your 2 years and travel the world and see Europe, then you can get lost in the job that you're trying to do. So I think understanding why you're going, if it is for a work reason, why you're going for the work reason, what are you trying to achieve from it, and then really making sure you embed that while you're there. It doesn't mean you can't do all the other things, but I think you've got to realize why you're doing the travel and why you're seeing that as an experience so that you really get the most out of it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Your pathway at Wrigley, continue to broaden. We've talked about a number of roles you did with roles in customer activation, category, sales ops, and sales leadership when you were back here in Australia. Kind of developing the classic McKinsey T model career. Was this a plan of yours to create that much breadth and ensure that you were kind of broadening as you went on?
I don't know. I wouldn't say it was a plan. I was given advice by one of my mentors around building careers, and I kind of use this analogy now for a lot of people I speak to. But talked around your career, and Chris kind of talked around the chessboard a couple of weeks ago. Seeing it like a patchwork quilt, and every patch you can put on your quilt is because you've got a new experience, and the more experiences, the more patches. That becomes your safety blanket for as you get high, that you can rely on and you can lean on when needed. I think a ladder straight up, when you're at the top, can feel quite unstable if you don't have the foundations or the learnings that needs to get you there. So I think I see that as picking up the right experiences along that journey as the right opportunity. So it's less around the role, but what's the experience I'm going to get? And there's roles I've taken because it taught me to manage without authority. There's roles I've taken because it helped me understand how to deal with ambiguity. So I think it's around understanding those experiences you're trying to get out of it versus the role itself. And that, I think, opens up a lot more roles to people than feeling like, well, my next role from a NAM has to be a national business manager role.
Yeah.
There's other ways to get that experience, and other NAM roles can give you that experience you need.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think there's one role that you've done, you think, God, I'm glad I did that. Without that, I would not be as effective in a sales director role.
Yeah, I mean, the central sales role at Wrigley's UK, and I think for a couple of reasons. One, you were managing 4 functions within a function, so the breadth of the role was vast. I think it was a senior leader role where you had a good level of number of people working with you in the role, and it had a big influence on the business and that. So I think being able to bring my sales and marketing shopper experience into this role, which helps leverage across that, I think was the one that transformed me, one from a business leader, but also from a people leader as well, because you got that combined experience on that breadth in that one role. So, and I think at the same time, I had a good mentor and good support in the business to ensure I was successful in the role as well.
Yeah, yeah. A couple of things we'll come back to, but one I'm keen to get into now, which is something we've asked all the sales directors, which is this move from being operational to strategic. So I think it's a really interesting point. Were you kind of conscious of when that happened for you?
Yeah, I really struggled with it to start with. I think as I was moving into more senior roles or people leader roles, to not get into the detail and not feel like I had to have all the answers. I think that was, I really struggled with that transition to start with. Again, it was probably this central sales role that gave me where it forced me, because I didn't have time and to be over everything, to actually take the lever off a few things and really grow my people so that I could think strategically and help them in that area, versus me feeling like I had to do the day-to-day as well. And again, having good support and advice from people around you to give you feedback on how you're tracking, and that was important within that role. So yeah, I think it's a tough move to make. And I think because at times you're feeling like, well, I'm not doing anything, but you are. It's the way you're helping your team deliver is actually what your role starts to become, and the way, and giving yourself time to think and be more strategic, versus feeling like, well, if I don't do it, then it's not my job. Yeah, and I think that mental change for me was tough.
That's a really interesting point, because I think, particularly in sales, or category where there's a real kind of cause and effect in terms of what you do, and all of a sudden, strategic role, there's a lag. There's a bigger picture. There's a helicopter kind of perspective that you're taking, which is different, and the ability to kind of move away from that is really interesting. Because when I interview a lot of people, it's interesting. Even senior sales leaders that I will interview, and I talk about strategy, and they often jump into the detail too early, because that's the bit that almost gives the gratification. I've impacted, I've done something. But actually, what I'm really interested in is, how do you impact across a business? How do you kind of take all the different parts of the business to make it work, all the different parts of your team, and take that broader view? But I think often we're naturally wired in a results-oriented environment to look at the result and immediacy.
And what was my role in it?
Yeah.
And not step back and go, actually, my role is helping to enable this to happen. And I think, and to do that, you've got to surround yourself with good people, because they're the ones that help you to be able to do that. And you learn from people within your team and around you to help you within that. And therefore, you're able to step out a little bit more often, and you get used to doing things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked earlier on about your, you describe yourself as an authentic leader, which is, a lot of people do that nowadays. It's but what I'm really interested in is how that plays out, because the point that I found really interesting was that this inclusive culture, which you like to foster in your teams, and how that unlocks the potential in people. So I guess firstly, how do you build an inclusive culture in what can be a very competitive role like sales?
I think you've just got to find a way to make time to spend with people. And I think that's, we can become very task orientated. And I think spending more time with people, whether that be in your team or around the business, allows that more inclusive nature to foster. I think listening and understanding people's perspective. And I think, again, a learning for me was, and still, I continue to need to focus and improve on it, but how often you give someone your perspective and they just go, cool, yeah, I get it. And then they run with it versus actually, how do we ask others for their perspective first? Because by asking for others' perspective, more perspectives are heard, and therefore you get more diversity of thought. And I think that's really important. And then the other one for me is when you're bringing people in or you're building talent, how do you get cross-functional people involved in that process? So how often do you interview for a NAM or a national business manager and you have 3 salespeople in the room doing the interview versus actually, can I get a senior brand manager and a customer marketing person or the finance person in? Because you get that more thought leadership, you get different questions, you understand the candidate or the development differently, and hopefully therefore you can deliver greater plans for them and support them better. And I think that makes a big change in the type of people you bring in to an organization, but how you then foster that diversity, because you have more people across the business sponsoring their development.
Yeah. Do you think that's a result of the evolution of the sales role, that we just need more diversity to be more effective because the sales role impacts across the business now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, sales roles aren't just executing the plan. Now, in a lot of ways, they do that, but they have to be generating and pushing into the business the thought and the customer lens on things. But I also think we've also got to remember our customers have got really diverse teams. Our shoppers are very diverse and our consumers are very diverse. And I think if we can't think about that in our own businesses, how are we going to meet the needs of those if we are one-dimensional in our thinking? So I think the more diversity you can have, and I guess there's diversity, there's inclusion, but the more diverse, and then how do you make that an inclusive environment, will get that thinking, and you'll be able to tailor a lot more because you'll understand the person on the other side a lot more as well.
Yeah, I think it talks to the previous point we made around salespeople being wired to often get an outcome. And what you're really saying there is sometimes you want to pause and take another perspective before you make your decision and jump to the conclusion. Whereas actually we're all, as results oriented people, we want to get the result fast.
Yes.
But actually it's not always the best result.
No, and you need some people in the team that hold you back a little bit and give you a bit of reality versus you're all gun ho and trying to get the result. And I think, I've been lucky in some of the teams I've worked with where you've got that different way of thinking and people are happy to challenge each other. And I think that really helps. If you can foster that, the outcomes, are far better.
Okay. In terms of your leadership and continuing on that theme, Pete, if you were to describe yourself as a leader in the early regular days when you were in the formative stages of your leadership career, would that be familiar to the people who work with you now?
Oh, parts, maybe not all. I think I think from a difference point of view, I think you'd say an early leader for me wanted to be liked as a leader. And therefore, and if someone couldn't do something, I'd just jump in and do it because that was the easy option. And I think, you hear it all the time. I think more now it's around how are you respected as a leader and in your role, and how do you continue to focus on enabling your people to develop and not feel like you're there to jump in and save the day. And I talk a lot more around empathy versus sympathy. I think it's easy to sympathise with someone and give them the excuse why it shouldn't happen and all the reasons why it's okay, versus the empathy of I get it and I understand and we'll work on it. However, this is still what we have to deliver, and how you have those conversations. So that's probably the difference in me. The similarities, I think the big thing for me is always being focused more on behaviours than functional side of things. And, I remember a conversation I had with a field rep when I was a field rep and I went to the regional manager role, and one of the field team didn't get the role. And my boss at the time told me he'd never get the role because he's got an attitude problem. and he was a great field rep. But every time someone went out with him, all they taught him was how to become a better field rep. No one talked to him about his attitude or the development of his behaviours and that. And so when you focus on that, I think 18 months, 19 months later, he took my role because we focused on that side, not just the functional side. And I think that was a good learning that I take with me is we can build functional capabilities, but that behaviour, the impact, and how you work with others is the bit that really we need to spend more time on.
And perhaps part of that is this whole difference between sympathy and empathy. I think sympathy wouldn't allow you to go there probably, but empathy with accountability does.
Yes, 100%.
And I think that's a really interesting differentiator. Yeah, I like that. After a stint with Frucor's sales director within that business, you joined Campari in your current role as commercial sales director. How was the transition into liquor?
That was good. Like I think I was told there would be a lot more differences than there was. And again, this bit around what's different versus similarities. I think there's a lot more similarities. And I think to fair to the liquor industry, it's come a long way in the last 3 to 5 years from the way people used to work and that. And I think there's some great people that have always been in the industry, and there's some great people that have joined the industry. But from a capability point of view, there's good capability. There's more structure than ever before. But I think because you've seen people move from FMCG, from other industries in to help build that. So I think there's, again, a lot of similarities. Relationships are key. And I think that's where, from outside of liquor, I think there's an opportunity to build more relationships outside of liquor and more partnerships, even within the supply world. I think that's a real benefit you see around the camaraderie, the community that liquor has. I think other industries could definitely benefit from. But yeah, I think, Jason, I've probably spent more nights out than in the last 2 years than I did 10 years working in FMCG. But understanding that part of the industry is fantastic.
Yeah, it's a benefit, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, late nights, I tell you. Yeah,
it depends how young your kids are. So, what's next in your career?
Well, look, I look at this and go, I wouldn't say I've necessarily got the career end goal, what that's looking like. I think what's important to me is what the roles give me. And I think, for me, it's around any next role or roles that I take on have to deliver a challenge for me.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in a role where everything's the status quo and it's just how do you just keep it going? How do you make a difference? How do you face into challenge and change? I think it's got to bring a learning environment. So it's something where you're learning something new, but you can add value. Leading people, I really enjoy that side of it. And then influencing whole business, that enterprise mindset is something that's really important to me. So I think if I look at roles that give me those experiences or get me out of bed for those, I think they're the roles that I'd continue to look at. And that could be, another sideways move into, back into customer marketing, into marketing, or MD at some point could be on the cards. But I think it's just making sure that role is giving me those things to give me that challenge every day is probably what's important I'm looking for at the moment, and how's it adding to that experience network and where I can bring something, but also learn something at the same time.
Yeah. And it's interesting, even as a sales director, moving to other functions is something you would see is very viable to do in terms of continuing to challenge you.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think as a sales director, your role is not just to lead the sales team. I think more and more, whether you're sales director, finance director, marketing director, the enterprise mindset and understanding other functions becomes really important.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I like being part of, and something in the current role is very clear and available to be part of. So I think how you start leading like that opens those opportunities to learning.
Yeah, great. Let's look at kind of career path support now, Pete. Do you have a mentor or coach that you work with?
Yeah, I've got a couple for different reasons. One more from a career point of view, one more from just a behavioural leadership development point of view, and then one where I can just shoot conversations off based on experience. So, and yeah, use them quite differently depending on where I'm at or what the challenges are in front of me.
Right. And for those who perhaps haven't developed mentor relationships, what's the benefit of having a mentor, and how does it differ from the relationship you might have with a line manager?
Yeah, I think, and you know, probably got this experience also from mentoring some people, is the good thing about having a mentor is your end result normally doesn't affect them. I think with a line manager, there can always be bias because what they're telling you and what they're asking of you and the advice they're giving you could have an impact on them. So I think you get a real neutral view, and it's not all line managers do that, but it is that thing you got to be careful with. I think with a mentor, there can be this neutral view because in the end, what happens next is it doesn't affect them directly. So I think that's one advantage of having a mentor. I think the other one is if you break it down, you can really work on clear opportunities or challenges with the mentor and get focused on a certain area. Versus again with a line manager, you're probably focusing on your full development plan in that area. So I think there's a couple of differences there that really make the difference of having that mentor.
Yeah, and as you said there before, particularly perhaps not having more than one mentor for different parts, for different types of conversations.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's what is clear for me, and what a clear learning for me with a mentor is the mentor has to know why they're your mentor, and you have to know why they're your mentor, and that kind of contract that you have is important around what you're trying to get.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it becomes a conversation and may not lead anywhere. So, with a lot of mine, it's really clear on why I'm using them and why we've set this up so that the advice can follow in the right direction.
So, for those who are perhaps unsure or don't have a mentor, how should they go about identifying and approaching somebody as a potential mentor? So you mentor people, so you've been approached.
Yes.
But you know, I think for some people who haven't done it before, it can be daunting to think, how do I go about this?
Yeah, I think it's a good challenge, and you've also got to make sure you choose the right mentor. But I think being clear on why you want one. If you want a mentor just so you've got someone to learn from, that's probably not necessarily going to help you. But if you know the reason or what the opportunity is that you want them for, or development area you want them for, that helps, because then you can identify the right mentor.
Yeah.
And then I think it's around using your network to identify who is the right mentor. And it may not be within your direct network, but someone in your network may know someone that's got a strength in it, and therefore they can set that conversation up to allow you to start having that mentor relationship. And I think once you've done that, building that trust and relationship is important so that you can be open and honest in that. I think if you're not open and honest with a mentor, then you won't ever get the advice you need. And that's that balance of having that trust within the mentor. But I think, understanding what you're looking for, and then matching the mentor who's got that strength and advice in that area is key to getting the advice you need.
Right. And it starts with being clear on what you're after. I think I completely agree. I've been approached often to be a mentor, and I just want to get better.
Yeah.
And that's not really useful.
No.
for me, but a specific area to work on. Well, I can make a decision. Well, can I help you there?
Yeah.
Am I, or not, or do I know somebody who perhaps can? And I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, and I'll do it with my team in the development plan. Going, okay, who in our business can help you with that? Because it's not my strength.
Yeah.
So have a speak to these two people who we see it as a strength in them, and they might be able to help you within that. And then it's around approaching them, having confidence, and the good thing I think is. People out there want to help others develop. That's something that's becoming more and more a positive impact on leadership. So if you are someone to be a mentor and they're clear on it, I think a lot of people are happy to support.
Yeah, great. In terms of, and this may come from mentors, but maybe anywhere, but what's the best piece of advice you've ever had about your career, and who gave you that advice?
Yeah. There's probably two, and the first one I talked around was how you see your career around the patchwork quilt. That was probably the one that's really stayed with me. I think the other one, and it was actually my dad gave it to me when I was interviewing for Wrigley's in the UK, and he said, understand the culture and the values of the business when you join it, because that company will shape your career, they'll shape you, and they'll shape your values going on if you have a long career with them. And I think that was really good advice, because I honestly look back on my career and the Wrigley environment I had in the UK, and that 12 years I spent with from UK to Australia has probably shaped me as a person.
Yeah.
Not only because I married someone that worked there, so it really did impact my life, but I think more so just the values that business had, and my career has all been built off that decision I made when I took the job at Wrigley.
And how might somebody, when they're looking at a business to join, explore and understand what the culture is actually like?
I mean, use your network, speak to people within the industry, and speak to people at the business. And I think that's really important. It's really interesting how often you interview someone and they've read the values on the website, and they can rattle them off really quickly, but they don't understand what they mean, or they don't understand how it fosters in a business. And I really like hearing how someone who comes into an interview has spoken to someone in the business, and why that person loves working for the business, and why that value is important to them. And I think that makes a real difference. So yeah, if you can build your network and use your network to understand businesses that you want to join, and every business, has their good and has their challenges, and I think understanding people in them will give you the best view of what that business is like.
I think that's great advice. I thoroughly encourage that. Always, when you're otherwise you get a very one-dimensional view, and the interview situation is an interview situation. It's you can only gain so much.
Yeah, but 100%. And I also think you also get a feel for the business in that interview process. I think one thing I take into interviews is the candidates interviewing me, as I'm interviewing them, because they've got to make a choice whether the business they're applying for is the right business for them, and how they go through that interview process, how that interview is handled. And in my early days, I went for one interview and I walked out the interview and they offered me the job, but having gone through the interview, I didn't enjoy the experience with the line manager, and turned the job down. And that's probably that bit around, they're interviewing you and your values and what the business is around, as much as you're looking for the right candidate.
Yeah, completely. I think one of my frustrations, I often talk about frustrations, I'm not always so frustrated, but when I interview somebody and their questions are limited or not challenging to me, or the feedback I get from the client that might be interviewing with is that they were light on questions, and nothing worse than saying, I've got it all, I've learned everything, you told me everything, and that's just such a missed opportunity to interview the potential company that you're looking to join. Demonstrate curiosity, demonstrate the fact you've thought and done some interesting research, challenge, and you'll learn. Plus you probably impress the person you're interviewing as well.
100%. I think obviously we do case studies, and the case study isn't the only bit that's been assessed. And how do you always add value past the case study? And to whether that's questioning or telling them other things that you've seen that aren't in the case study, that has the business thought about this, and what's your view on that? I think open that up, it puts a little pressure on the person doing the interview, but you get a good dialogue, and it shows that inquisitive nature. Just make sure when you're asking the question, there's reason to ask it. Don't just start shooting off 1,000 questions, because it's getting that balance right.
Completely. I get feedback often from all levels, from people in formative career stages up to senior sales directors, HR, that the career conversations aren't as productive as it could be. We touched on this through some of our conversations previously on the program. So I'm hoping that the sales director incubator is going to improve that. That's one of the main goals. In your view, Pete, how should somebody prepare for a career conversation?
Yeah, I think again, there's two sides to this. But the first one is, when you're going to have a career conversation, make sure the person you're having it with is prepared as well. You don't just turn up and go, I want to have a career conversation today, because you want that other person on the other side to be prepared for the conversation. And then speak to people to understand what is it you're really looking for. And when I talk around my career, I don't talk around the jobs that I wanted to apply for. I talk around those things around, I want a job that's challenging, I want a job that's learning, I want a job that's leading, influencing, and I want one that's around developing people. Now, if there's a role like that, and interesting, I went to I was with one of my mentors who at the time was the HR director at Wrigley's. The question was, have you ever thought about HR? Because you can get all that in a HR director role, and I never thought about it.
Mm.
So again, it's around what is it that gets you up out of bed, that will motivate you. Those less so around the job, but the experiences or the attributes, and focus on them, and then see what roles come as part of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good way to do it. And I think the other one is talk to your network, talk to your friends, talk to other people outside the industry around their role. What do they get out of it? What's in their role? What's different? So you kind of get a bit of a flavour of the roles. And marketing, brand manager, a great role for anyone that wants to do sales. And the reason I say that is because the number one thing I learned from being a brand manager was how a factory worked. Because you had to make MPD. So you're in the factory, understanding lines, understanding how innovation is made. I never thought going into a brand manager role when I applied that I'd learn how a factory works. So it's those experiences and those attributes that you learn, which then doesn't matter what the role is. Sometimes it's more around that side of it.
Yeah. I used to be a brand manager and I used to visit a lot of factories.
Yes.
And it's something that you actually, unless you've been in marketing, you don't realize. I think people think marketing is creative and it's comms.
And you learn that through.
But it is that, but it's a lot more.
Yeah, you learn that through your degree, right? It's all about marketing and the 4 Ps.
Yeah.
My first day was making a Starburst ad as a brand manager. My second day was a category review, and my third day was in a factory.
Yeah.
So that is the role of a brand manager. And I think don't underestimate. There's so much learning in those roles, as well as a NAM role, as well as a category role.
Well, for those who are interested, the Marketing Director Incubator starts next week. It's a great segue. A week today, we kick off with that, guys. And you're more than welcome from the sales community and category community to jump on. It could be really interesting. There's some cracking CMOs and marketing directors that are meeting between now and Christmas. Every sales director on the program has had this different career path, and we discussed yours earlier. No one's followed a linear route to the top, which I think for those in early to mid career, I think is surprising often. I think there's an assumption that you follow this path and you get to the top, and no one does it like that. So we mentioned earlier how your path kind of does typify that McKinsey, T-shaped career. And look, I know as a recruiter who's been doing this a long time that a candidate who's got the right experiential breadth will make more shortlists on senior roles than one who's raced up the linear path. What broadening experiences and roles impress you when looking at a resume? I guess a brand manager is one of them. But if you're looking for somebody for a senior role in your structure, what kind of stands out as you think, wow, that's good. That's a good experience.
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer is any. I think understanding why they were doing those roles, I think it's important. But when you see CVs where someone's been a VRP, in a Woolworths, done a category role, been an account exec or account manager, all those type of roles start going, there's differences in each of those roles, and you can start asking questions around what you learn in that role. Why was that role important? How's that helped you in your career to date? And I think that's where, if people can answer those questions, I think that's really important. I think that's harder to do when you go, I've been an account exec, I've been a national account manager, I now want to be a national business manager. It's kind of the same learning pattern the whole way through. So that understanding why and the learnings that the roles have given you, I think are extremely important as part of that. So yeah, any to a degree. And I know people that have had a supply role first, and then they've moved into a account exec role, and just again good experience, because as an account exec you need to understand how the product gets to the customer. So there's great learnings that then change your conversation you have with the customer that you couldn't have if you hadn't done that role.
Yeah. I like the supply chain piece. We had a couple in the program who've done supply chain roles. I remember Swati Prasad at Unilever started out in supply chain. I think there's a lot of similarities, a lot to be learned around not just the kind of how does a product move through a supply chain, but there's still a lot of shared skills around stakeholder management, analytical capability, influencing. I think there's some, but from a very different perspective.
Yeah, and managing big teams, right? They're big teams in supply. So we had one of the national account managers go and manage a shift on the in the factory for a year and a half. So just completely different experience, but that was their way to get some line management experience.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. That's a really good example. At what stage in someone's career should they look at taking broadening roles? Are there particular points you think it's more useful than others?
Look, I think it's harder the higher you get up the ladder. I guess you could say it's harder than if you don't have some of those understandings. Now, don't get me wrong; it doesn't mean you can't do it. I think if you've been inquisitive and you've led projects or been part of other things that are giving you that experience, use them to help build, right? Yeah. You don't necessarily have to do the role, but are you on a cross-functional project that gives you that experience? Are you leading a particular project for the business that's going to be transformational? They can help you on that journey. But I think the challenge I think you've got is, yes, breadth, but have you also got enough depth? And I think people will start worrying about breadth. And I've done a year and 1 month here and a year and 1 month there. Have you learned it? Have you understood it? What have you been able to take into your next role? And I think there's a balance between having the right depth as you're getting breadth in some of the roles, not all of them, but some of them, to be able to really gain that experience.
Yeah. Which kind of comes to the next point, which is can you be too broad? Can you lose sight of your core function?
Not necessarily, but you can if you don't have depth. So I think there's a few roles in there, and there's a couple for me as a field rep. I did 9 months. As a regional manager was 16 months. But when I went to marketing, I did 3 years because I knew I may not be there forever. So I wanted to really get some experience in that. When I went to customer marketing and activation, there was, within the 2 roles I did there in UK and Australia, there was about 3 years there because I knew that was a good experience. But there's certain roles that had less time in. Yeah. But I think it's knowing which ones you need to go, I need some depth in this. I need to. Account manager's a clear one, is how do you spend a year? That first 6 months is someone else's plan. The next year is your plan. Then you've got to deliver the plan. So it's kind of that, how do you show that learning and what you've been able to do over that period of time? It's not this attitude to get out before you get caught. It's stay in it and go through the process.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point. Some roles you can flick through, but I think for the ones you mentioned there as good examples of where seeing a business cycle through, getting beyond inheriting somebody else's job and being accountable for what you're delivering, perhaps not just once or twice, and dwelling in a role, it isn't slowing you down. It's actually really developing that patchwork quilt to create the bigger platform for you to go forward.
And I think even when you look at national account roles, each national account role delivers you a different experience or different opportunity. Working on, I'll use our industry, working on BWS is a different experience than a national account manager on the Indies channel. Yeah. Because the complexity of people, the complexity of customers versus the challenge of the depth of understanding of one customer. Yeah. And that. So I think both have their challenges, but both give you 2 completely different learning opportunities.
Yeah, great. When interviewing people, Pete, and I've asked this to everybody as well, what impresses you most about candidates that you meet and what frustrates you? And this could be internal or external candidates.
Yeah, look, I think what impressed me is someone that's got good self-awareness, can answer questions and understand the depth of the questions. They understand who they are. They can face into their development areas really clearly and talk around things they haven't got right. And I think if you've got great and what they've got right as well, but if you've got really good self-awareness, it makes it a lot easier to manage the associate going forward. And that comes back to that learning agility. Do they connect with people? Are they results driven? Can they deal with change? Yeah. They're kind of the important ones. I think what is the challenge in the interview is again when you just don't get the depth of answer and you keep pressing and it really sits at that surface level. And I think it's a real opportunity to show your ability through how you answer those questions and really think about the answer versus just feeling like you're just skimming the top of that answer.
Yeah, it's often for me I think people jump to the result of what they've done as opposed to the story behind how they got there.
Yes,
it's the story how they got there, what they learned, and what mistakes they made is interesting. Yeah, that's when the richness comes as opposed to the outcome was X, because without context, that's meaningless.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think for me that difference between the what and the how, and I think you talk about my early career. it was all about the what.
Yeah.
I was able to take risk. It was okay with failure, but it was around what I was doing and what I was achieving versus as I went more into the customer marketing roles and the marketing roles, it was more around the how I was doing things, not what I was doing and the perspective that was giving you. So 100% that how is kind of normally more important than the what.
Yeah. And when you meet prospective candidates, in an interview type process, do they ever kind of broaden the conversation past the role that you're seeing them for, in terms of how they might be a benefit for the business over the long run, or is it typically always stick in the role?
I think it very often it's more insular into the role. And I think it's a good challenge for anyone coming into interviews. How do you think, again, breadth around, kind of that bit around how do you show you can add value outside the role as well, versus here's what I can do in the role. But if you're a great candidate and you've got great experience, talk around how you can add value outside and how you want to be part of a bigger part of the organisation.
Yeah.
That's a great insight on someone that can think and bring perspective to the role.
Yeah, it impresses me if it happens, and it happens too infrequently.
Yes.
Okay. Before we jump into some open questions, to finish up as we do in every session, what 3 pieces of advice would you give an aspiring sales director?
It's kind of some of the stuff we've touched on, is be curious. I think be inquisitive, be curious, spend time understanding functions outside of your role, understanding industries outside your role, spend time reading information about industries. But there's always an opportunity to learn if you're being curious. Ask the why something's happened. If you don't understand it, that's okay. Really important to understand why things happen, not just what has happened. So that's number 1. Surround yourself with good people. And I think that's one from people you work with as you move into leadership roles, but just people that you trust and will give you the right advice. It's too easy we lean to the people that will give us the advice we want to hear, and that's affirmation to what I want to do. But it's to surround your people that will give you honest advice, honest feedback, because that will help you through your development, really build you. And then I think the last one for me, I'd probably say be honest with yourself. Be honest with your own, where you want to go, what you're trying to achieve, and where you're at on your journey within that. And that might be, some people are really hard on themselves. Give yourself some benefit of the doubt, back yourself a little bit more. And some people think they're there and they're not quite there yet. So really have a good assessment, and it probably comes back to that self-awareness, is be honest with yourself around where you're going and how you're going to get there and where you're at on that journey.
Great, fantastic. Let's jump into some questions that have been supplied by the guys in the program. So, how do you create an organization that thinks customer first?
Yeah, it's a good challenge. And actually, I led a project when I was at Wrigley's around this. But what I learned through that was it's about an enterprise business mindset than customer first. Customer's part of that journey, because we have to work with customers, consumers, and internally. But one thing I would say, one advice I've seen go wrong, and I'd give to anyone in sales: talk positive. Salespeople need to talk positively about the customer. If I remember when someone left the business back in the UK, and we were given the leaving speech, and the line manager said, you've done a great job managing that big hairy beast of Tesco. And I looked at that going, if you've got marketeers, if you've got customer marketing team or finance people that are nervous about going to a customer or think customers are a pain, then you've just given affirmation that that's the case. We need to be advocates for our customer and talk positively. They're humans. They're no different to suppliers, and it's the same on the customer side. They need to talk positively about suppliers because we're in it together. And I think that if salespeople can really talk positively around the opportunity and what we're trying to do, that can fester around the business a lot better and give people more confidence, because without customers and suppliers working together, it's going to be a tough industry. And I think that's one thing Liquor does really well, is that connection with customer and suppliers seems to work really well. You feel like you're in it together.
Yeah. maybe that's that back to the kind of empathy with accountability piece.
Yes.
In terms of the relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Humanize the customer is
Yeah.
another one.
Yeah.
I remember we brought Woolworths in to present to the wider business. So they weren't just Woolworths, that was, you know, the face and the people that the accounting deal with every day.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you personalize the person and realize that they're no different to us. We're trying to get a job done and we're trying to win together.
Great. Personal development feedback, Pete, how's this scoped you as a leader in your career?
Yeah, look, I've always been an advocate for feedback for me and giving feedback as well. I think you've got to listen to it, and there's two choices with feedback. You can do something about it and you can ignore it.
Yeah.
And sometimes ignoring it is the right thing to do, because you've got to make sure it's not just one person's view, but understand the why and understand it, and just be gracious and say thank you once you've been given it. I think I've been given a lot of great feedback around functional development, but again, that behavioural side around helping me understand how I can have a greater impact has allowed me to change the way I work with people, the way I think about people, and really adapt my style, which again, in an environment where we're talking about diversity, the more you can adapt, the more likely you're going to create an inclusive and a place people want to belong. So, I'm a massive advocate for people seek feedback, but make sure you're doing something about it, or choosing the right choice around how you implement that feedback.
Great. Okay, time for one more question, I think, before we wrap up. But I think it's a really good one. How important is building a network in developing your career?
Yeah, extremely important. I think, again, how you build that network, both in your business and outside your business, is important. I see a lot of people try and build their network up, but don't underestimate the sidewards and network you build, and the people that may sit at a level lower than you, and the network you build with them. I often find, when you're talking about someone's talent and someone and how good someone is, or what they're good at, it's normally because you've heard it from someone else, not because you've seen it. So you telling me how good you are at something versus someone else telling me, because you build that network, they're seeing it, and you're working hard and you're working well with people, that carries a lot of weight, and you learn so much from it. And I think that ability to continue to learn from your network is really important. Just be authentic with it. Don't do it to get somewhere. Be authentic around why you're building that network.
Yeah, that's great advice. Fantastic. Thanks, Pete, for sharing your journey and giving us your time this morning. It was another really interesting conversation. Another kind of great insight into someone else's pathway, which is different again. And I love the conversation about your time in the UK and that last piece on network as well. There's so many points that came through today, which I think, I hope will prepare you guys in the program to think more about career, less about the job in front of you, and to be prepared for a career conversation, building that kind of narrative that's going to enable you to make a really good decision, which will pay off for all of your career, not just that next role. And we've got 4 more sales directors lined up to take us through to the end of the year, and the next one is on October 22nd, so another couple of weeks. Sorry, that's today, 2 weeks from today, into November. But we've got Jen Johnson, who's sales director at Mars. So really looking forward to catching up with Jen. As a reminder, I'm going to plug again the marketing director Incubator next week, October 29th. We start that with Nathan Lowe, who's got a really interesting career. He's currently CMO at Meat and Livestock Australia. So all those hilarious ads that we see on TV, that's them. But before that, he's worked in the he worked throughout FMCG, Unilever, Sunrise, Ladbrokes, in gambling. So he's got a really diverse background. Thanks again, Pete, for joining us today. Thanks again, everybody, for being on the program, and have a great Thursday.